On her 30th birthday, her mother-in-law handed her a gift box wrapped in silk paper, but inside, it wasn't jewelry, nor flowers. It was divorce papers. Her husband stood phone in hand, recording the moment, as if savoring a scene carefully staged by his own family. But they didn't know that she had already signed those papers long ago. They thought they were taking away her happiness, unaware that they had just given her freedom. And from that moment, everything they once used to humiliate her would become the weapon that destroys them. New York in early October carried that familiar scent of fall, a hint of chill, damp leaves, and the cozy warmth drifting out from late-night cafes. Tonight, the streets around Manhattan glowed golden after the rain, lights shimmering on the slick pavement. Inside a quiet taxi rolling down the avenue, Alina Queen leaned against the window, her hand tightening around her purse as she watched people laughing beneath the streetlights. She was on her way to her 30th birthday dinner, an event graciously hosted by her husband's family, the Owens, at an upscale Italian restaurant called Morello's, where the elite came to display their happiness. It might sound like a night to look forward to outsiders, wine, roses, and congratulations. But to Alina, the heaviness in her chest felt like a stone. She had lived long enough in that household to know, whenever Constance Owen, her mother-in-law, smiled too perfectly, a performance was about to begin. When Alina stepped into the restaurant, she froze. Everyone was already there, yet instead of cheerful chatter, the room was thick with an unsettling silence. At the center, a long table draped in white linen, wine glasses lined up neatly, flowers arranged in pale cream, perfectly matching Constance's silk dress. Mitchell, her husband, sat at the head of the table, the seat that should have been hers tonight, looking more like a host than the one being celebrated. "Alina, you're here," Mitchell said, his tone stiff, holding up his phone in video recording mode. She offered a faint smile and stepped closer. The warm light glinted off his face, a face she had once loved with all she had. 7 years together, 3 miscarriages, countless nights convincing herself he's just under his mother's pressure, all of it drifted past her like wind through a hollow room. Constance spoke first, her voice sharp as breaking glass. "We've already ordered." "Alina." "Roasted chicken. No sauce. I remember you said you're watching your weight, right?" Alina nodded. No reaction, no defense. She'd long learned that in the Owen family, defiance was a luxury. Her sister-in-law, Vanessa, lowered her head with a smirk, exchanging glances with her husband. Mitchell's younger brother, Trevor, raised his glass as if preparing for a toast. Bernard, her father-in-law, pretended to study the menu, avoiding her gaze. Everything was choreographed, a play rehearsed to perfection. "We have a very special gift for you tonight," Constance said, placing a small silver-wrapped box in the center of the table. "From all of us. A gift to set everyone free." Alina looked at it. The wrapping was immaculate, the ribbon tied into a flawless bow. For a few seconds, she could hear her own heartbeat, coldness spreading from her wrists to her shoulders. Still, she smiled, rested her hand on the lid, and opened it. Inside were neatly stacked papers, the first line reading "Divorce Agreement." Divorce papers. Each word is like a blade catching the candlelight. The room went silent. Then a small laugh slipped from Vanessa, followed by her husband's chuckle. Trevor lifted his glass with a mocking grin. "To freedom." Mitchell kept the camera steady, capturing every flicker of emotion on his wife's face. Alina slowly skimmed through the pages: names, wedding date, property clauses. Every word was familiar, because she had signed the original version 2 weeks ago. She lifted her eyes, meeting the cold reflection of the phone lens. "This is your gift to me?" Constance nodded. "Yes. You should thank us. We're helping you escape responsibilities you never fulfilled." At the nearby tables, diners had begun to pause mid-bite. A little girl stared from across the room, eyes glistening. The scene looked torn from a film about cruel, privileged people. Alina set the papers down and drew a deep breath. Then she reached into her purse, pulled out a black pen. The click echoed louder than Trevor's laughter. She signed each page, her strokes clean, unwavering. Then she folded the document and placed it neatly before Constance. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice calm to the point of frost. "This is the most honest gift I've ever received, Thank you for confirming what I've known all along. She rose. The sound of the chair scraping the wooden floor was sharp enough to sting. She looked at Mitchell one last time, still holding his phone, blank eyes reflecting the camera's light. I hope your mother's proud, Alina said gently, almost tenderly, because you just lost the only person who ever loved you. Then she turned and walked away through the golden lights and stunned faces. A waiter silently opened the door for her, bowing slightly as if offering a quiet blessing. Outside, the rain had just stopped. The streets shimmered with 1,000 golden fragments of reflected light. Alina took a deep breath. Freedom smelled like the night after rain, damp, cold, but real. Her car turned off the avenue, crossed the Brooklyn Bridge, and headed toward a quiet neighborhood where she'd rented a small apartment, number 47. No one in the Owen family knew about it. No one knew she'd been preparing for this night for months, every move, every step. Like a chess game, she was already winning. The apartment sat on the 5th floor of an old brick building, its windows facing the East River. When she turned on the lights, a soft amber glow washed over the walls, the bookshelves, and the teacup, which had been scented with dried cinnamon from the morning. Everything here was hers. The deep blue sofa, the hand-painted frames, the rug underfoot. No Mitchell, no Constance, only quiet and her own warmth. She hung up her dress, slipped into a soft sweater, tied her hair back, and sat by the window desk where her laptop waited. 3 draft emails were ready on the screen, just waiting to be sent. The first was to Elizabeth Crane, her attorney. They did exactly as predicted. I signed the copy in front of them. The plan can proceed. The second, to Martin Hale, her independent accountant. Transfer all assets to the private account, Section B. Originals are at the law office. And the last, the shortest, to someone named Patricia Gaines. It's time. Let's begin. She pressed send. 3 soft whoosh sounds like the heartbeat of a new life beginning. Outside, Manhattan's skyline flickered across the river. Alina watched the lights dance, symbols of power so many believed eternal. But she knew better. Nothing was eternal, not even reputation, when it's built on someone else's pain. On her desk sat a small wooden box. She opened it. Inside, an old birthday card, written in her late mother's shaky handwriting. My dear, when someone gives you pain, accept it as a lesson, not a punishment. Alina smiled, her first genuine smile in months. She turned on the music. Hallelujah floated softly from the old speaker, Leonard Cohen's raspy voice blending with the faint drip of rain outside. Steam rose from her teacup. On the screen, she began to type the first lines of what would later become a blog known nationwide. Some people give you freedom when they think they're giving you pain. This is my story of women once underestimated, who learned to stand again. The cursor blinked like a lighthouse signal on a dark shore. She saved the file, leaned back, and closed her eyes. Outside, New York buzzed as always, but inside the small apartment, there was only the steady rhythm of her heartbeat. No longer the rhythm of fear, but of someone who had just begun to live again. The next morning, as the first sunlight poured through the old window, Alina woke to a silence she had craved for 7 years. No more clicking heels of Constance echoing down the hall. No more clinking glasses in the living room every night. Only the wind whispers through the curtains, carrying the incredible scent of the East River. She slipped out of bed, wrapped herself in a robe, and poured coffee. The aroma filled the small apartment, modest, warm, and entirely hers. Everything here had a story. The wooden table she bought from a thrift shop in Brooklyn, the Oregon landscape painting she made during her loneliest days, the blue curtains she chose because they reminded her of her mother's eyes. On the desk, her laptop was still open. The title of the piece she'd written the night before glowed on the black screen. The gift of being underestimated. She reread each line, made a few edits, and then saved the file. Her phone buzzed a message from Elizabeth, her lawyer. Confirmed, signature received. Everything's valid. We can proceed. Alina typed back 2 words. Understood. She set the phone down and exhaled slowly. Freedom didn't arrive with music or laughter. It came in the quiet realization that no one could order her around anymore. She opened the small wooden filing cabinet beside her desk. Inside were dozens of folders, each labeled neatly. Owen Holdings, Bernard's memo, Constance, charity fraud, internal records. These were the documents she'd gathered over the past 2 years quietly, meticulously, while still living under their roof. When she first began recording, Alina hadn't thought of revenge. She only wanted a way to preserve the truth, in case they ever tried to destroy her. But those recordings proved how deeply that family had lived in deceit over time. One file contained Constance's sharp voice. A good wife knows when to stay silent, even when her husband is wrong. That's how you keep a home. Alina listened again and smiled faintly. Silence, that had been their weapon for so long. Now, she would use it to bring everything down. By noon, Alina walked to the small grocery store at the corner. The shopkeeper, an elderly black man named Henry, had known her since she moved in. He smiled, setting a bag of vegetables on the counter. "Haven't seen you in a while, Alina. You look healthier these days." "Thank you," she said softly. "I just got out of a noisy life." Henry chuckled. "Brooklyn's quieter than Manhattan, but quiet doesn't mean lonely. Around here, people let you be who you are." His words lingered in her mind, "let you be who you are." It sounded simple, yet she realized she hadn't been herself for years. Back at the apartment, Alina opened her laptop and posted her first anonymous blog entry. She didn't use her real name, just signed it AQ. In that piece, she didn't write about the divorce. She wrote about what it felt like to be underestimated, to be treated as decoration in a wealthy household, to be measured by the size of a diamond ring. Her tone was calm, not bitter, an honest reflection on the cruelty of those who believe they are good. The post ended with a single line. "When you're a woman, they tell you patience is strength. But sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is walk away in silence." She hit publish. No applause, no audience, just the steady rhythm of her heartbeat and a quiet smile. But deep down, she knew something had begun to change. That afternoon, her inbox chimed with the first reply. "I read your story. I've been through the same thing. Thank you for speaking for so many of us." Just one line, yet it brought tears to her eyes. She turned on soft music and opened the window. Sunlight warmed her cheek, and the river breeze carried a tender chill. In the distance, the Brooklyn Bridge shimmered, cars gliding by like restless fireflies. That night, she wrote again, and she didn't stop. Days passed slowly, but each morning Alina woke feeling a little more herself. She learned to cook for one, read before bed, and rediscovered what freedom felt like. One late afternoon, the phone rang as she brewed another cup of coffee. It was Rhonda Keller, once Bernard Owen's personal assistant. "Alina." Rhonda's voice was raspy but warm. "I read your piece. I know it's you even with the initials AQ." Alina paused, but didn't deny it. "And you're calling because of that?" "No," Rhonda said. "Because it's time you knew you're not alone. I still have copies of some files he tried to destroy." For a moment, Alina couldn't speak. She remembered Rhonda had left the company years ago, scapegoated for a missing fund. "Meet me," Rhonda said. "Tomorrow. Haven Deli, Midtown, 10 a.m. The next morning, a light rain fell. Alina wore a beige trench coat and a wide-brimmed hat and walked through the quiet streets. Haven Deli was small, filled with the comforting scent of coffee and toasted bread. Rhonda was already there, seated in a corner booth, a brown folder resting in front of her. "These are internal emails from Owen Holdings," Rhonda whispered, eyes sharp with caution. "They prove the family used charity funds to launder money and hide their debts." Alina flipped through the pages. The phrase "Constance Owen, approved transfer," appeared again and again. Each repetition sent a pulse through her chest. "Are you sure you want to go this far?" Rhonda asked quietly. Alina looked out the rain-streaked window, watching people hurry by under umbrellas. "I don't want revenge," she said softly. "I just want the truth to be heard." Rhonda smiled faintly, sliding a cup of coffee toward her. "Then let's start here." That meeting was the first time Alina felt she was no longer a victim. She was taking control of her own story. That evening, back at apartment 47, she carefully placed the new documents in a fresh folder labeled Phase 2, Proof. Then she wrote a single line in her notebook. "The first day I stopped being afraid." Night fell. When she reopened her blog, The view count had soared. Each comment was a voice from somewhere: women, men, survivors, strangers trying to escape the dark. One anonymous comment caught her eye. "I once witnessed something exactly like what you described at an upscale restaurant. Someone being handed divorce papers in front of everyone. If that was you, I want to say, you're stronger than they'll ever be." Alina froze. Someone had seen. Someone remembered. The truth was already rippling outward. She turned off the laptop and stepped onto the balcony. The rain had stopped, the air calm and clear. Below, the city still pulsed with life. She looked down at the glowing windows, wondering how many people inside were pretending to be happy just as she once did. A flash of lightning lit up her face, not with fear, but with determination. Alina whispered, as if making a vow to the city itself, "I will tell this story, piece by piece. Not for revenge, but so no one else has to stay silent like I did." Inside apartment 47, the sound of rain faded into the distance. She sat back down, opened her laptop, and began to write the next chapter, the one that would make all of America listen. And outside, the New York sky cracked open with a thin line of dawn, the first light of a woman finally awakening. That morning, New York was draped in a soft gray mist, a drizzle hanging in the air like a cold breath. Alina woke early, brewed a cup of mint tea, and opened the window to let the breeze sweep through her small apartment. She didn't know the whole world would read her story within a few hours. At 8:15 a.m., her phone started buzzing, non-stop notifications flooding the screen. Comments, shares, emails. Her anonymous blog, "The Gift of Being Underestimated," had just been featured on the front page of the Atlantic Post. The post had been shared over 10,000 times in less than 30 minutes. Alina stood frozen, staring at the glowing screen, her breath catching. She had never sent the piece to any outlet, just posted it quietly on her blog. Someone had read it, shared it, and now what once was her private pain had become a voice for millions. On social media, the hashtag, "The Gift of Being Underestimated," began trending. Comments poured in like rain. "This made me cry. I've been underestimated, too. Whoever wrote this, you're not alone. This isn't just about marriage, it's about the right to exist as a human being." Alina placed a hand over her chest, feeling her heartbeat pounding hard against her ribs, a strange mix of fear and pride. It felt like stepping out into daylight after years of being locked away in darkness. Meanwhile, inside the glass tower of Owen Holdings in Manhattan, another face stared back from the reflection: Mitchell Owen. He had just stepped out of the elevator, phone vibrating incessantly in his hand. "Mitchell," his assistant called out, alarmed, "have you seen what's trending this morning?" He frowned. "No. Why?" On the screen, the headline blazed: "Anonymous Essay Exposes Birthday Divorce Gift Inside New York's Elite Circles." Beneath it, a blurred photo, the soft light of a restaurant, a woman standing at the table, and a man holding up his phone, recording. Mitchell froze. His hand trembled. That scene, he knew it instantly. It was them that night. Somehow, the video had leaked. Someone, perhaps a waiter, had recorded it from another angle. 37 seconds long. But 37 seconds was all it took. The internet exploded. People dissected every detail, every glance, every cruel word from Constance Owen. The cruelest birthday dinner of the year. Is this how the rich treat their own? Alina sat quietly before her laptop, watching the clip replay over and over across hundreds of accounts. Her own voice echoed through millions of screens. "This is the most honest gift I've ever received." There was no hiding now. She was no longer the anonymous wife. She was that woman. At the same time, Constance Owen was shouting into her phone, her voice sharp and fury. "Find out who leaked that video." Her lawyer's reply was cold. "Ma'am, you can't sue. Everything in the footage is true." Mitchell slumped in his office chair, his phone buzzing with endless calls. Investors demanded emergency meetings. News outlets flooded the story. Within 2 hours, Owen Holdings stock dropped 6%. Outside, the drizzle continued. Alina calmly poured another cup of tea in her Brooklyn apartment and watched the media storm unfold. No anger, no satisfaction, Just a strange, peaceful clarity, the feeling that the truth had finally spoken for itself. An email appeared in her inbox. "You don't know me, but I used to work for the Owens. They owe a lot of people an apology. Thank you for having the courage to speak." Alina read it, then typed back quietly, "Thank you for believing me." As the city lights flickered on that evening, she stepped onto the balcony and looked toward the gleaming Owen Tower in Manhattan, its cold white lights still burning. With the sound of distant traffic below, Alina smiled faintly. "You all thought I was weak," she whispered. "Now watch what happens when a weak woman stops being afraid." The night wind swept through her hair, the lights from the Brooklyn Bridge shimmering across the river like 1,000 threads of hope. The next morning, the national morning shows opened with the headline, "The Divorce Gift Story Sparks National Outrage." The viral video had ignited debate across every platform. How many women are living inside beautiful cages like this? They didn't say her name, but everyone who knew Alina understood. In private circles, people whispered, speculated, and shared images. Mitchell tried calling her all morning, but she never answered. His final text read, "We need to talk." She saw it, then turned off her phone. Across the city, Constance held a small press conference in the same living room where she once entertained New York's elite. She was dressed in a white suit and pearls and faced the cameras without flinching. "Our family is under attack by lies," she said coldly. "This is a smear campaign." But an hour later, the Herald Times released an audio recording Constance's unmistakable voice saying, "Give her the divorce papers at the table so she remembers her place." There was no denying it. The country roared. Talk shows debated emotional abuse among the rich. Lawyers, psychologists, and women's rights advocates filled the airwaves. Alina said nothing. She didn't need to. The truth was speaking loudly enough. She knew when people once underestimated you, the thing they fear most isn't your revenge. It's your silence, and the world finally sees them as they are. By the third day, her inbox was overflowing, thousands of messages from women everywhere. Some shared their stories. Some wrote only one line. "I read your post and decided to leave." One evening, another message arrived from an unfamiliar address. "I'm Patricia Gaines. I think it's time you and I meet." Alina froze. Patricia Mitchell's ex. The one Constance once called a stain on the family name. Alina typed back, "I know. I've been waiting for you." That night, she didn't sleep. She sat on the balcony, watching the traffic flow beneath the bridge, every light streaking past like a memory. The dinner, the laughter, the humiliation, all of it replayed in her mind. And now, everything had reversed. Meanwhile, Mitchell wandered his empty apartment, turning on the TV only to shut it off again when his face appeared. He didn't recognize the man on the screen, the one holding a phone, recording his wife's humiliation. He called his mother. "Mom, what do we do?" Her voice on the other end was ice. "Nothing. The more we talk, the more we expose ourselves." But the world wasn't staying silent. A short interview with Alina appeared in the Women's Journal the next day. Her single quote sent shockwaves across the country. "I didn't write to get revenge. I wrote because I was taught silence was safe. But I've learned silence only makes them stronger." The words spread like wildfire. A new hashtag emerged. Silent no more. Women across America began sharing their stories, each ending with the same line. "I was underestimated, too." Alina didn't need to appear on television. She didn't need to explain. She sat in her small apartment and watched the truth ripple outward, unstoppable. It was no longer in her hands. That was the real victory. That weekend night, she turned off the lights and stood by the window. From there, she could see Manhattan blazing, the same city that once suffocated her, now lit up by countless new voices. She whispered into the wind, "Thank you for underestimating me. Because of that, I learned how to believe in myself." On the desk behind her, her laptop screen glowed thousands of new readers and stories. And somewhere out there, in the dark, Mitchell stared at his own screen, whispering to himself, "She's won. Not because she destroyed anyone, but because she stood up." The night breeze drifted through the open window. Inside apartment 47, Alina closed her laptop, leaned back, and shut her eyes. For the first time, she slept deeply, peacefully, free. Late one November afternoon, Alina sat in a small cafe called Lorena's Corner, tucked at the intersection of 12th Street and Avenue C. The place was quiet, bathed in warm light, its old ivory walls carrying the soft hum of slow jazz. She chose a corner seat with a view of the street bare trees, a few cyclists passing by, and the faint, cold breath of New York in late autumn. In front of her, a cup of cappuccino had gone cold. On her phone, an email from Patricia flashed on the screen. "I'm coming. I'm bringing a few others. They have stories too." Alina read the line, a mix of anticipation and calm swelling in her chest. In the weeks since her essay went viral, dozens of women had reached out. Some just wanted to say thank you, but a few, like Patricia, wanted something more. They wanted the truth to be heard. The cafe door opened, and the bell chimed softly. Patricia walked in grey sweater, hair tied low, eyes cautious yet steady. Two women followed. A tall, elegant black woman named Rhonda Keller, and a young brown, skinned woman with bright, determined eyes, Imani Foster. "Alina Queen," Patricia said softly as she approached, her voice trembling slightly. "Patricia," Alina replied, standing to shake her hand. That handshake wasn't between rivals, it was between survivors. They all sat down and ordered coffee. For a few minutes, no one spoke. Only the quiet clink of spoons against porcelain filled the space. Finally, Rhonda broke the silence. "I used to be Bernard Owen's secretary," she said, voice calm but heavy. "I saw things that never made it into the books. Their charity foundation was just a shell. They fired me for mishandling records, but it was because I knew too much." Alina nodded. She remembered Rhonda, the woman who always carried stacks of files through the office, whispered about for being too stubborn. Imani spoke next, her tone younger, edged with anger. "I was engaged to Trevor Mitchell's brother. When I got pregnant, they made me sign an NDA in exchange for money and told me to disappear. I lost the baby, and they made sure I lost my reputation too." No one said a word. The weight of her story pressed on them like a storm. Patricia looked down at her coffee, her voice barely above a whisper. "I have a daughter," she said. "Jordan. She's 15. Her father is Mitchell." The air in the cafe stilled. Alina looked up, her chest tightening, but she didn't speak. Patricia went on, eyes fixed on the table. "When I got pregnant, Constance came to me. She offered money as long as I signed a statement saying I'd terminated the pregnancy. I refused. I left and raised Jordan on my own. They never knew she existed." A long silence followed. Alina felt memories clicking into place, the strange pity in Constance's eyes, the veiled contempt. Now she understood. It wasn't just disdain, it was fear. "What do you want to do?" Alina asked quietly. Patricia looked up, her eyes steady, resolute. "I don't want their money. I want the truth out there so my daughter knows her mother didn't stay silent." Alina drew a deep breath, then placed her hand flat on the table. "Then we'll do it. Together. Not for revenge, but so no one has to bow their head again." They all met each other's eyes and nodded small gestures, but enough to shift everything. 5 women sat around a small table in a Mexican diner outside Manhattan that evening. Along with Alina, Patricia, Rhonda, and Imani, there was Kesha, a former housekeeper for Constance, and Louise, the nurse who had cared for Alina during one of her miscarriages. Each brought something different, a story, a piece of proof, a scar. Rhonda placed a USB drive on the table. "This contains a recording of Bernard and Constance discussing a Heart of Hope fund transfer. It's money laundering." Kesha opened her purse and slid over a few photographs. "These are copies of the audit sheets Constance falsified, the dates don't match." Louise took out a small envelope, medical records, proving Alina's miscarriage had been caused by severe emotional distress. Piece by piece, story by story, the table filled like a deck of final cards being laid bare. Alina looked at them, feeling something stir deep within her, the sense of no longer being alone. She'd written her first blog post in solitude, in the quiet of apartment 47, but now she had allies. "We don't need to scream," she said softly. "We just need to tell the truth, clearly, honestly, and with enough courage. They can't look away." Rhonda smiled faintly and nodded. "I thought I'd moved on, but watching you, I realized silence only helps them live longer." They all raised their glasses of lemonade, a simple toast for a new beginning. None of them knew what would come next. They only knew that from tonight on, they would never be alone again. In the following days, apartment 47 turned into a secret headquarters. Every night, warm light spilled from the fifth-floor window. Inside, 6 women gathered around the table, the clatter of keyboards, piles of documents, sighs mixed with quiet laughter. Rhonda sorted through old company emails. Imani verified details. Patricia cross-referenced charity data. Louise reached out to healthcare advocates. And Alina compiled it all, weaving their accounts into a single story. Not an accusation, a chronicle, a diary of the forgotten. Night after night, while the city slept, they kept working, one cold cup of coffee at a time, one new file, one growing flame of belief. One rainy night, Patricia asked softly, "Are you ever afraid, Alina?" Alina paused, then smiled faintly. "I used to be, but when you know you're right, fear becomes fuel." The room went quiet. Rhonda smiled. "That sounds like something out of your blog. Maybe you should write another chapter." Alina nodded. "I will, but this time, it won't just be mine." And so the following post was born. The women they tried to erase. Alina told each woman's story gracefully, no names, accusations, just truth. The post spread faster than the first. Talk shows picked it up, and news outlets ran specials titled, "How many stories like this are still hidden?" Letters poured in from across the country. Women who had been maids, office workers, wives, caretakers, all writing about the constancies in their lives. One evening, Rhonda turned on the TV. Breaking news. The New York Financial Bureau has reopened its investigation into Owen Holdings after leaked internal records surfaced online. The room fell silent. Alina looked up at the screen, a glint of something fierce and calm in her eyes. Louise whispered, "That was fast." Alina smiled softly. "Not fast, just right on time. When truth is ready, it finds its own way." They all looked at one another and laughed, a tender sound laced with tears. No one knew what tomorrow would bring, but in that moment, they knew they had changed something. That night, Alina opened the window. Across the river, the Owen Tower still glowed, but not as brightly as before. "There used to be an empire," she murmured. "But every empire begins to crumble when the lowest voices rise." The night wind carried the scent of coffee, old paper, and hope through the apartment. Back at her desk, her laptop pinged a new message. From Women's Journal. "We'd like to interview you about your movement." Alina stared at the screen momentarily, then turned off the light. She wasn't ready to show her face. She didn't need to. The voice was enough. And so, in the quiet of Brooklyn's night, the women kept writing, telling, remembering, rebuilding justice out of their own stories. On a foggy December morning, snowflakes drifted lazily over New York. Inside apartment 47, Alina sat wrapped in a wool scarf, a half-finished stack of files before her. The scent of coffee mingled with fresh paper, the quiet fragrance of her working mornings. Her phone rang. It was Elizabeth, her lawyer. "Alina, I have something you need to see," she said, her voice calm but urgent. A letter found in Mitchell's old office archives. They were cleaning out storage. "You should read it." An hour later, Alina was at the law firm. Elizabeth placed a pale yellow envelope on the desk. On the front, written in faded ink, "Private, to Mitchell Owen." "We found it inside the divorce files," Elizabeth explained. "It's from a woman named Patricia Gaines, dated 15 years ago. It was never opened." Alina froze. Slowly, she drew out the letter. The paper was yellowed, the ink faint, the smell of time lingering in the folds. The first line stopped her cold. "Mitchell, I'm pregnant. I don't want you to worry, but your mother already knows. She came to see me yesterday." The following sentences were shaky, uneven. "She gave me a check and told me to disappear. I refused. She said, 'You don't belong in our world.' I couldn't stop crying. I'm leaving. I'll keep the baby. Don't look for me. She won't let you rest if you do. Sined, Patricia Gaines." Alina set the letter down, taking a slow breath as a chill crept up her spine. Suddenly, Everything made sense, the strange glances from Constance, the unspoken tension in that house, the cryptic remarks about Mitchell's mistake. Elizabeth studied her face. "What will you do with it?" Alina's voice was soft but steady. "Find the woman who wrote it." That evening, she went to a small cafe in Queens, the place Patricia had chosen. It was warm inside, golden light, reflecting off frosted windows. When Alina entered, Patricia was already there, 2 steaming cups of cinnamon tea on the table. "You found the letter," Patricia said quietly, her tone equal parts relief and sorrow. Alina nodded. "I think you should tell me the rest." Patricia hesitated, then reached into her bag and pulled out a photograph. A girl with curly brown hair, bright hazel eyes, and a smile lit up her whole face. "This is Jordan," she said. "My daughter, Mitchell's daughter." Alina stared at the photo. The resemblance was unmistakable, especially in the sad curve at the edge of her smile. "She told me if I ever came near, she'd ruin me," Patricia continued. "So I left. I worked 2 jobs and raised Jordan alone. But now, she's sick. Her kidneys are failing. She needs a transplant. I'm out of options." Her voice cracked on the last word. Alina said nothing. Part of her wanted to be angry at Mitchell, at the family that had buried a child's existence. But another part that had survived everything, and still believed in kindness, only felt sorrow. "What do you need me to do?" Alina asked. Patricia looked up, eyes wet. "You don't need to do anything. I want my daughter to know the truth, and if possible, to meet her father. Just once." They sat in silence after that. Outside, the snow fell heavily, tapping softly against the window like the ghosts of forgotten years. Alina thought of her own miscarriages, of nights crying alone in that cold marble bathroom. And now, a child, Mitchell's child, was lying in a hospital bed. When they parted, Alina said gently, "Tomorrow, I'll go with you." Patricia squeezed her hand. "Thank you, Alina. I thought you'd hate me." Alina smiled faintly. "No, I only hate lies. The truth, no matter how painful, deserves to be heard." The next morning, the air was knife-sharp with cold. Alina and Patricia arrived at St. Mary's Hospital on the Upper East Side. Room 214. Jordan lay in bed, a pale girl with IV lines on her arms, her eyes bright and far too wise. "Jordan," Patricia said softly, "this is Alina, my friend." The girl turned, smiling faintly. "I know you. You wrote The Gift of Being Underestimated. We read it at school. You're courageous." Alina blinked in surprise, then smiled. "Thank you, but you're braver than I am." Jordan grinned, though her eyes were tired. "Mom said you had something to tell me." Alina sat beside her bed, her voice gentle. "You have the right to know the truth. Your father's name is Mitchell Owen." The girl was quiet for a few seconds, then nodded, not shocked, only thoughtful. "I guessed. Mom hid it, but I found old pictures." "Are you angry?" Alina asked softly. Jordan shook her head. "No. What's the point? He didn't know I existed. I'm still here. I don't understand why grown-ups are so good at erasing people." The words hit Alina like a knife wrapped in truth. A 15-year-old had spoken what generations of women never dared to say aloud. That afternoon, Alina left the hospital with her heart heavy. On the drive home, her phone buzzed a message from Mitchell. "I need to see you. My mother's been saying terrible things. There's something I have to know." She almost ignored it. But then she remembered Jordan's eyes, calm, searching, not vengeful, only wanting to understand. And Alina knew. It was time for Mitchell to face what he'd helped create. She replied, "Meet me at St. Mary's, room 214. When Mitchell walked into the hospital room, Jordan was reading a book. He froze in the doorway, breath caught, hands trembling. Patricia looked up. "Mitchell." He didn't answer. His gaze fixed on the girl, the same brown hair and quiet eyes he saw in the mirror every morning. "What's your name?" he whispered. "Jordan," she said. "And you are?" It wasn't anger, just a question. I'm your father," Mitchell stammered. Jordan held his eyes for a long moment. "Biological, maybe, but a father? That's something else." The room went silent. Patricia lowered her head. Alina stood near the door, her eyes stinging. Mitchell sank into a chair, hands shaking. He tried to explain how he never knew, how his mother hid everything, how he, too, had been a victim. But Jordan only said quietly, "You're an adult. You could have asked if you really wanted to know. Silence is a choice too." Mitchell broke down, face buried in his hands. Patricia turned away, and Alina said nothing. Her heart had no triumph, only a deep, aching sadness for how truth always came too late. The hospital confirmed that Mitchell wasn't a compatible donor the next day. Patricia cried. Jordan only smiled faintly. "It's okay," she said. "There are still good people in the world." A week later, Alina returned to the hospital carrying a sealed envelope marked anonymous donor. Patricia opened it. Inside were the confirmed documents of a matching donor. She looked up, tears spilling over. "Alina, was it you?" Alina smiled softly. "Don't ask. Just let her believe kindness still exists without needing a name." The surgery was a success. Jordan recovered quickly, her smile returning, fragile but radiant. When she was discharged, Alina came to say goodbye. Jordan hugged her tightly, whispering, "I think I know who the donor is, and I want to say I'll live kindly with the part of you that's now part of me." Alina smiled, brushing the girl's hair gently. "That's all I need." Outside, snow fell thick and quiet. Alina lifted her face to the white sky, letting the flakes melt against her skin. For the first time, she felt true peace. Behind her, Mitchell stood silently, watching her go. He understood then the woman he once humiliated had just saved the child he'd never dared to claim. But Alina didn't look back. She walked on through the snow, small, steady, unbreakable. She didn't need gratitude, only the quiet certainty that she had chosen what was right. The media storm hadn't calmed after Jordan's story. If anything, it had triggered a chain reaction, the slow, humiliating collapse of the Owen family's empire, one layer of their reputation peeling away like old paint. On the morning news, cameras showed Constance Owen stepping out of the Owen Holdings office, her face stiff, stripped of its usual poise. The anchor's voice was measured but cold. Following the investigation into charity funds tied to Owen Holdings, several family members have been summoned for questioning. In a silent apartment across town, Mitchell stared blankly at the screen. He hadn't slept for days. His coffee had gone cold. Unread documents piled on his desk. The phone wouldn't stop ringing. Investors, lawyers, journalists, all demanding answers he didn't have. He was no longer the polished executive of Owen Holdings. He was just the man from the birthday video. People's eyes shifted everywhere he went, not pure hatred, but that cruel mix of pity and contempt. His assistant, Kate, knocked softly on the door. I'm quitting, Mitchell. I can't handle the calls anymore." He nodded. No protest, no attempt to stop her. The door closed, leaving behind the hollow echo of silence. That afternoon, he went to the office only to find his ID card deactivated. The security guard spoke quietly, embarrassed. "I'm sorry, sir. Board's orders. You're not allowed inside." Mitchell gave a thin smile, shoved his hands in his pockets, and walked away. For the first time, he understood what it felt like to be exiled from the world he once thought he owned. He wandered through Bryant Park, the bare trees trembling in the wind. A group of young men on a bench glanced up. "Hey, that's him," one whispered. "The guy from the video." Mitchell quickened his pace, but not fast enough to outrun the shame that clung to him like a shadow. That night, he drank alone. The city lights reflected his hollow face in the mirror. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed a dry, broken sound. "The birthday gift," he muttered, voice hoarse. "Yeah, I guess this is mine now." The laughter cracked into sobs. Across the river, Alina sat in a quiet bookstore cafe in Williamsburg, reviewing her latest draft. Her piece, "The Women They Tried to Erase," had been accepted for serial publication by the Herald Journal, along with a request for an interview. But she hadn't answered. For her, it was enough. The truth had spoken. Jordan had healed, and Alina just wanted peace. But peace, she'd learned, could feel strangely hollow. Through the window, snow fell in gentle silence. Somewhere deep inside, she knew Mitchell was unraveling. She no longer hated him, only pitied the man who traded his soul to please his mother. But pity didn't mean forgiveness. That night, she dug out the old recorder she'd used in the Owen house. The first tape clicked into place. "Alina, you're overreacting." My mother's only trying to help you. Mitchell's voice warm, practiced, perfectly polite. If you keep being this weak, you'll never earn respect in this family. Alina turned the recorder off and smiled faintly. Words that once cut deep now sounded like echoes from a life long gone. She opened her journal and wrote a single line. Forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's just no longer letting pain make the choices for you. A few days later, on a grey January morning, Mitchell received an unmarked envelope in the mail. Inside a minor key and a single note. Storage room 38, Langston Building. The mirror doesn't lie. He didn't know why, but he went. The Langston was an old midtown hotel, the same place where he and Alina had celebrated their first anniversary. The scent of aged wood and expensive perfume lingered faintly, hauntingly. Down in the basement, the corridor was dim, lit by one flickering bulb. He found room 38 and unlocked it. Dust swirled as the door creaked open. Inside were boxes, photographs, old tapes, and a small monitor sitting on a table. Dozens of notes covered the wall, quotes, journal fragments, scraps of truth. On the desk lay a single letter, written in a familiar hand. Mitchell, if you're reading this, you've already lost everything. I don't want you to suffer. I want you to see yourself. His hands trembled as he pressed play on the monitor. Alina appeared on screen sitting in a softly lit room, looking straight into the camera. I'm recording this not to accuse anyone, but to remember. Because one day, I might forget what it felt like to survive. The following clip showed their kitchen. Alina is washing dishes. Mitchell's voice behind her, sharp and dismissive. You make my mother pity you. Could you stop performing for once? Mitchell recoiled, clutching his head. Another tape played Constance's voice this time, crisp and cruel. She can't give you a child, Mitchell. A woman like that will never be complete. End it. He sank into the chair, shaking. On the table were Alina's medical records, every miscarriage, every diagnosis, every note, labeled stress-related. The final clip was only 10 seconds long. Alina, facing the camera, voice calm. If you're watching this, Mitchell, know I signed the divorce before you ever did. I just let you believe you were in control, because for me, freedom was worth the wait. He sat there for hours, surrounded by the wreckage of his own life, a museum of guilt and memory. When he finally left the Langston, snow was falling hard. In the hallway mirror, his reflection caught him by surprise, hollow-eyed, aged, defeated. For a moment, he saw the man from that infamous video, the one holding a phone, recording his wife's humiliation. He whispered to the empty corridor, "This is the mirror of truth." That night, Mitchell called Alina. She answered, her tone steady, almost gentle. "I've seen everything," he said quietly. "There's nothing left to defend. I know. I just wanted to say I'm sorry." A pause. Long, heavy. "You don't owe me an apology," Alina said softly. "You owe it to yourself." Then she hung up the sound light, final, like a door closing after too many years left open. After that, Mitchell sat by the window for a long time, watching the city glow through the falling snow. All the things he'd once called power, money, prestige, control blurred into smoke. And in that quiet ruin, he finally understood what Alina had known all along. When you build your life on someone else's suffering, one day, that life will collapse. Mitchell returned to the Langston building on a grey February morning. He carried a thermos of coffee, a few blank sheets of paper, and a pen not to write an apology, but to write himself back into existence. The basement was quiet, its light dim and yellow. Storage room 38 waited, the same one he'd fled from weeks ago, too afraid to face again. This time, he opened the door slowly. The smell of dust, rust, and old paper lingered, but something in the air had changed. It felt less like accusation, more like invitation. The notes Alina had left still covered the walls. "If you want to understand me," one read, "start from left to right." Mitchell obeyed. The first line, Year 1, I learned to stay silent to keep the peace. Then, Year 2, I began keeping a journal because no one was listening. Year 3, I miscarried. You stayed at your mother's birthday party. Year 4, I realized silence has a sound, the sound of breaking. He read each note, his throat tightening. On the desk lay a brown leather notebook, its spine taped together. The first page was addressed in her careful handwriting, "To the man who once promised to protect me. By the time you read this, I no longer need protecting. I've learned to save myself." He flipped through. Between the pages were small photographs. Them at the beach, her laughing in the kitchen, the first Christmas tree they decorated together. Each had a handwritten caption: "The moment you still saw me. The moment you looked past me. The moment you stopped looking." He shut the book abruptly and sank onto the cold concrete floor. This room felt like a coffin for memories, a tomb where every unburied truth lay waiting, and he was the sole mourner forced to witness the funeral of his former self. He opened another folder labeled "Financial Folder" for court. Inside were statements, transfers, and receipts. Each number, each signature, a quiet confession, proof of how the Owen family had profited off lies. At the bottom of the pile was a single note from Alina: "I don't want them in prison. I want them to stop hurting people." Mitchell looked up at the dim ceiling. For the first time, he understood. Alina had never wanted revenge. She had only wanted freedom, and he, terrified of losing control, had mistaken her freedom for betrayal. Before leaving, he stopped at the cracked mirror hanging near the door. Two reflections stared back, one from the past, one from now. He whispered, "She didn't destroy me. I did." For the first time in months, his chest felt still, not lighter, but quieter, because he'd stopped running. In the days that followed, Mitchell returned to the storage room daily. He brought his laptop, typed notes, studied every file like a student finally learning the lessons he'd ignored. He began writing letters not to anyone living, but to the ghosts he'd left behind. February 12, "I miss you. Not how a man misses a lover, but how someone misses their own humanity. I thought strength meant control. It really meant fear. I thought loyalty to my mother was a virtue. It was cowardice. I thought you needed me. But it was me who couldn't survive without your forgiveness." He printed each letter, sealed them in a wooden box labeled, "Not to be sent." One afternoon, by chance, he saw Jordan in the park. She looked healthy now, cheeks pink, hair cropped short, a spark in her eyes. Patricia walked beside her. Mitchell approached slowly, hands buried in his coat pockets. "Jordan." She turned, smiling politely. "Hi, how are you?" "I'm better, thank you." "I read about Miss Alina," she said. "She's starting a scholarship for young women. I'm applying. I want to study finance like her." Mitchell smiled faintly. "She'd love that." Jordan nodded, her eyes bright. "She taught me something, that you can be born from darkness and still walk toward the light. I think you can too." The words hit him like sunlight through fog. He wanted to say something, but Jordan had already turned to leave, her steps light, her presence lingering. He watched her go, knowing he would never earn her love. But perhaps, he thought, he could still learn to live without causing harm. And that, too, was a beginning. That night, Mitchell wrote a single email to Alina: "Thank you for letting me find my own mirror." No reply came. However, the Herald Journal published a new interview with her days later. The final line read, "I don't believe in revenge. I believe in rebirth. Sometimes, the most humane thing you can do for those who hurt you is to let them finally see themselves clearly." Mitchell closed the paper slowly. Outside, snow fell softly, like ashes. He stood, turned off the lights, and for the first time in years, fell asleep. Without pills, without ghosts, without running. March in New York was still cold, but inside the glass towers of Manhattan, the air burned like midsummer. Every channel, every headline, every feed blazed with the same story: the investigation into Owen Holdings. That morning, Alina sat at Blue Sparrow Cafe on Green Street, sunlight pouring through the window and glinting off her steaming cup. On the TV across the room, a news anchor's voice cut through the quiet. "The Department of Justice has officially opened an investigation into Owen Holdings and its affiliated charities on money laundering, tax evasion, and asset concealment charges. Bernard and Constance Owen have been suspended from all business operations pending inquiry." The words were calm, but to anyone who understood, it wasn't just an update, it was a verdict. Beneath the broadcast, a ticker scrolled: "Key witnesses, Rhonda Keller, Patricia Gaines, and members of the gift network. Alina set her cup down. She didn't need to watch more. Everything was unfolding exactly as she and those women had spent months preparing. Constance Owen sat frozen before her vanity mirror across the city in the grand Owen estate in Greenwood Heights. Once, she'd been the picture of upper-class perfection: Chanel suits, pearl necklaces, a smile rehearsed to symmetry. Now, her image filled the newspapers for another reason: not philanthropist or society icon, but mastermind of a fraudulent charity network. Bernard had left early to meet his attorneys. Trevor, the youngest son, was in federal custody. The eldest, Vanessa, had locked her social media accounts after public outrage called her an accomplice in silence. Once so full of polished laughter and crystal clinks, the mansion echoed only with the clock ticking. Constance stared into the mirror. Her hand trembled. She remembered that night years ago, smiling triumphantly, forcing Alina to sign the divorce papers. She'd thought she'd won, but the reflection before her now was cracked, hollow, and tired. And for the first time, she realized she had been given the poisoned gift. Later that morning, Alina's phone buzzed. A call from Women's Journal. "We'd like to invite you to speak at a conference on transparency and philanthropy. Would you share your group's story?" Alina paused for a moment, then replied softly but firmly, "I'll speak, but not about Owen Holdings. I'll speak about the women who rose from the wreckage. Rhonda, Patricia, Imani. They're the real story." That afternoon, Alina stepped onto the stage under the gentle lights of a Brooklyn auditorium. No designer dress, no glittering jewelry, just simplicity and truth. Her voice carried, clear and steady. "I don't believe justice lives only in courtrooms. It begins when someone dares to tell the truth, even knowing it might break them." Applause thundered. In the front row, Jordan sat beside her mother, eyes bright with tears. She whispered to Patricia, "Mom, she looks like real light." 3 days later, headlines across America roared: Bernard and Constance Owen, arrested for fraud and money laundering. Photos of the once mighty couple being led out of their mansion flooded every screen. No one could believe how fast an empire so revered could crumble. In his small Lower East Side apartment, Mitchell watched the news, silently. He didn't smile or gloat, just muted the TV and sat still. He knew this collapse wasn't a tragedy, it was a consequence. He opened a drawer and took out an old wedding photo, him and Alina, laughing, radiant, believing in forever. He stared at it for a long time, then set it back carefully. He didn't tear it, didn't burn it, because now he understood even the darkest past has value if it teaches you to see light. That evening, Alina returned to apartment 47. Inside, Rhonda, Patricia, Imani, and Louise were waiting. They gathered around the laptop, watching the latest reports. No one spoke. Silence filled the room, a silence heavy with relief, grief, and something like peace. Patricia finally whispered, "Did we win?" Alina smiled softly, shaking her head. "No, the truth did. The rest of the time will be handled." They chuckled together, a sound light and fragile, like breath after a storm. That night, Alina stood on her balcony. The wind from the East River was cold, but gentle. The city glowed not with blinding power, but with a softer, truer light. On her table, the Herald Journal lay open. The headline read, "The Woman Who Made America Look Again, Alina Queen and the Gift Network." Alina smiled faintly. "I didn't make America look again," she murmured. "I just made myself look straight." Across the river, the Owen Tower stood dark, its once gleaming lights extinguished, its logo gone. The empire that feared the dark had finally been swallowed by it. As the wind stirred her hair and the curtains fluttered, Alina closed her eyes and whispered, "It's over." But it wasn't an ending, only a pause, a quiet comma before a new chapter began. The chapter where healing finally had room to grow. April in Seattle always carried a thin veil of mist, like a silk scarf draped across the lake. When Alina arrived, she brought only 2 suitcases, one filled with clothes, the other with memories. She didn't know how long she would stay, only that she needed a place where nothing reminded her of New York. Seattle was gentle. Each morning, the air smelled of roasted coffee and rain-soaked pine. The streets wound quietly through wooden houses, and cherry blossoms bloomed along every fence. Alina rented a small home on the edge of West Queen Anne, with a balcony overlooking Lake Union. She began work at an architecture firm not as a director or a founder, but as an independent financial consultant. She liked the simplicity: a computer screen, reports, black coffee. When co-workers asked about her past, she only smiled. "I used to work in New York," she said. "That was another lifetime." One evening after work, she stopped by a small cafe at the corner of Western Avenue. The wooden sign read, "Moore's Place, Coffee and Design." As the bell above the door chimed, she saw him, a man bent over a drawing board, afternoon light brushing the silver in his hair. He looked up, eyes the color of ash. "Hi," he said. "What can I get you?" "A cappuccino," she replied. "No sugar." He smiled. "Same as mine. I'm Daniel Moore, owner of this place, and a man trying to be an architect again after life broke somewhere in the middle." His words made her laugh. "And I'm someone trying to live again after life nearly drowned me." They both smiled, the kind of smile exchanged between people who have survived storms and recognized the silence in each other. From that day on, Alina visited Moore's place often. She sat by the window, working quietly, while Daniel would bring her coffee without asking. They didn't talk much, but their silence was never awkward. It was the kind that hummed softly, like background music. One rainy afternoon, just as she was leaving, Daniel said, "Do you ever think people must lose everything to start over?" She paused, then smiled. "I don't just think so. I lived it." He nodded slowly. "I lost my wife 3 years ago, in a car accident. For a while, I stopped believing in anything. But when I saw you sitting there calm, steady, I thought maybe, sometimes, someone else's peace can heal you too." Alina's chest tightened, not from pity, but recognition. She knew what it was to find comfort in the quiet presence of another soul. She answered softly, "I guess we're both still learning to keep living, right?" He smiled. "And if we're lucky, maybe we'll learn together." The days that followed fell into an easy rhythm. Mornings, Alina ran along Lake Union. Afternoons, she worked. In the evenings, she read or stopped by the cafe. Daniel didn't talk much, but when he did, his words felt warm like a small fire in a familiar room. "One day," he asked, "would you ever return to New York?" She shook her head. "No, I buried part of myself there. Here, I'm learning to grow what's still alive." He smiled. "Then congratulations, you've learned how to plant again." And she realized some people don't enter your life like lightning. They quietly arrive like sunlight through clouds, making you want to stay. Spring crept softly into Seattle. On the trees outside her house, tiny buds began to bloom. One early morning, Alina woke to the glow of dawn. Mist drifted across the lake, the water mirroring the first light of day. She brewed tea, turned on soft music, and watched the ripples shimmer like silk. A knock sounded at the door. Daniel stood there, holding a bouquet of white tulips. "Good morning," he said. "I was heading across the lake to sketch a new project. Saw your light on, thought I'd stop by." She invited him in. They sat by the window, the scent of tea and rain curling around them. "Do you remember the first time we met?" he asked. "Of course. I ordered a cappuccino without sugar, and I thought you were running away." She smiled. "You were wrong. I was finding my way back." Daniel looked at her for a long moment. "Alina, I don't know if I should say this, but every time you smile, I'm less afraid of my past." She met his gaze, and for the first time in years, she didn't look away. There was something in his eyes, steady, kind, unhurried, something real. "You know," she said softly, "I used to think anyone who got close to me would take something away. But now I see some people don't come to take. They come to remind you that you still deserve love." Daniel didn't speak. He reached out, his hand brushing hers, a gentle touch, but enough to remind her she was still human, capable of trust, warmth, and beginning again. Outside, the sun climbed higher, pouring gold through the window. The lake shimmered like liquid light. Alina felt the weight she'd carried for years dissolve into something quiet, something like peace. No more fear of the past. No more dread of what might come. Only this, a moment, honest and straightforward. That evening, She opened her laptop and began typing the first lines of a new book. The storm has passed. But sometimes, dawn doesn't come from the sky, it comes from the gentle way someone looks at you, once you've learned to believe in yourself again. She saved the file, smiling, and outside her window, the sun rose fully, soft, golden, a true dawn, after a storm that had lasted far too long. A bright June morning poured golden light across Seattle. Alina stepped out of her car and looked up at the small white two-story building, sunlight glinting off the brand-new sign above the door, the Jordan Foundation, a place to begin again. Below, in smaller print, founded by Alina Queen and partners, a breeze carried the scent of lavender from the flower beds along the sidewalk. She stood there for a moment, breathing deeply. Years ago, she'd walked into a humiliating birthday party. Today, she was walking through another door still trembling, but this time from happiness. Inside, Patricia was directing volunteers as they hung paintings. Rhonda checked the computers, and Jordan, now 16, sat at a desk, organizing files. When she saw Alina, she beamed. "You saw the sign outside, right? We came up with the words, 'A place to begin again ourselves.'" Alina smiled, smoothing the girl's hair. "Perfect choice. Everyone deserves a place to begin again." Behind them, Daniel appeared, paint on his shirt sleeve, a rolled blueprint in hand. "Perfect timing, Miss Founder," he teased. "We need you to approve the color for the reading room." "Go with your instinct," she said, smiling. "I trust the best architect / coffee maker in Seattle." Their eyes met, no declarations, no need for words. Everything that mattered was already understood. The building had once been an old preschool. Daniel and a team of volunteers had spent 3 months restoring it. A large painting by Jordan hung on the main wall, a woman standing in the storm, holding a shining lantern. Below it were the words, "No one can extinguish the light of someone who has learned they survived." That afternoon, Alina stood by an upstairs window. Below, the courtyard buzzed with life, Rhonda arranging flowers, Patricia pouring tea, Jordan carrying water, and Daniel adjusting the sign by the gate. Sunlight poured over them all, and it felt like witnessing a quiet miracle for Alina. She took an old notebook from her bag, the one she'd filled back in apartment 47. The pages, once stained with tears, were now joined by new ones, full of names, projects, plans, and dreams. On the last page, she wrote, "At last, I can use my voice to heal not only for myself, but for those still learning to stand again." She closed the book and smiled. For the first time, she no longer felt the urge to keep running. That evening, the opening of the Jordan Foundation was simple. No cameras, no press, just a small circle of people who had weathered the same storm. Warm yellow light drifted across the courtyard, carrying the faint scent of coffee from Daniel's nearby cafe. Alina looked around at the faces: Rhonda, Imani, Louise, Patricia, Jordan, and Daniel. She held the microphone, her voice trembling, but no longer afraid. "There was a time I thought life was nothing but loss. But I've learned loss isn't the end. It's the space where new things can grow. This place, the Jordan Foundation, isn't mine alone. It belongs to everyone who's ever been silenced or overlooked. Here, we begin again without asking permission." Applause filled the air, soft and sincere. Jordan ran up to hug her, whispering, "Thank you for giving Mom and me a new life." Alina hugged her back. "No, Jordan, you're the one who reminded us goodness still exists." From a distance, Daniel watched, his eyes reflecting the kind of light that doesn't dazzle, it soothes. He understood now. Love didn't need promises. It just needed two people to stay still in the exact moment of peace. After everyone left, Alina and Daniel sat together on the steps outside. The air was cool, tinged with salt from the sound. Above them, a faint ribbon of northern lights stretched across the sky, rare, but real. Alina spoke softly. "You know, I used to think someone was loving happiness, but now I know happiness is loving life enough to want to stay." Daniel turned to her, gently taking her hand. "Then I promise to stay too, not to save you, but to live beside you." She smiled, light, unguarded, authentic. They sat there for a long time, saying nothing, listening only to the wind, the night insects, and the sound of two hearts once shattered, now beating in quiet rhythm. The next morning, Alina woke early. From her balcony, the sunrise spilled over Lake Union, flooding the white building below with gold. The sign outside glowed in the new light, the Jordan Foundation. She whispered to herself, "This is where peace stops running, and where life begins again." And if you've made it this far, thank you. Thank you for walking beside Alina Queen, a woman who once lost everything, but chose to rise, to love again, to forgive. May her story remind you that no one is weak for having fallen, and that every wound can turn into light if we're brave enough to look at it with kindness. If this story touched you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay with us for the next journey. Stories of love, healing, and the quiet faith that every storm eventually gives way to dawn. To Ezi.